Hey, this is Mike McAdam from GenX Guitar. Today we're going to talk about how to spice up your blues or rock solos by using guide tones. So if you're like me and many other rock guitarists that start off playing, we learn the pentatonic scale. And like I said in my past pentatonic scale video, it's great because you can just learn the first position minor pentatonic scale and you're in the club. You can immediately start playing things that sound musical. But this can become a trap for a lot of us. And then we'll learn the cage system or we'll learn the pentatonic scale in 5 positions. But here's something to think about: how to, if not get out of the box, at least expand what you're playing inside of the box. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a blues progression to demonstrate what are called guide tones. And guide tones are when you take the 3rd and the 7th of a chord and highlight them. You basically play those notes to spell out that chord. So where this is different is if you're using a pentatonic scale, you're just laying that scale across a chord, and basically you're kind of treating notes fairly equally. You're going to lean on some of the chord tones because they sound good. You may not even be thinking about that, but it's going to lay out, again, across the chord. You just play that scale. So what I'm going to do in this example, or these examples, is I'm going to take the first 8 measures of a 12-bar blues. And the reason I'm doing it is I want to isolate what happens on the 1 chord and what happens on the 4 chord. So typically in a 12-bar blues, you're going to have the first 4 measures be the 1 chord. We're going to do this in the key of G, so it'll be G7. And then measures 5 and 6 are going to be the 4 chord, which will be C7. We'll go back to G7 on measures 7 and 8. Now, the turnaround of a blues, which are measures 9 through 12, is a separate section. We'll talk about that later. I just want to keep this really simple. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the G minor pentatonic scale over this progression, and I'm not going to really make the changes, so you get kind of an idea of what that sounds like. So for these examples, I'm not going to be adding a lot of performance techniques, bending, etc. I want to really try to keep this as clear as possible. And of course, you can add those things as you go on. So what I want to do is I want to take that pentatonic scale and start looking at it more like chords than a scale. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply guide tones, but I'm only going to put them on the top 4 strings. And it's going to look like this. So the pentatonic scale is here. Okay, so if I play a guide tone, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the 3rd of G7, which is going to be, actually I'm going to start with the 7th, the flat 7th, which is going to be F. And then I'm going to have B here, F here on the 2nd string, and I'm just going to start with those guide tones. So I can take a G7 chord and just kind of start feeling around those notes. Now I can play them in between the typical pentatonic stuff I play. Another trick I've seen Danny Rabin do, and this is very cool, is you could take that pentatonic scale. Instead of playing the B note, you could just bend B flat up every time you play it. So that's a little trick. If you're having a hard time getting that B note in there, you can do it. So let's now add the C7 chord. Again, I'm only going to play this on the top 4 strings. So I have the guide tones of F and B for G7, and this. Now if I take C7, I take this progression and just move it down a half step. So the guide tones will flip at that point. You'll have B flat, which is the flat 7 of C7, and then E, which is the 3rd. So just flip them over that that way. Now you have the same thing on these string sets where you have the notes B and F, G7. You just play them a half step lower on C7, and you have the E and B flat notes. So let me show you how to play this in the context of a blues. So if I do that, you immediately hear it sounds more like I'm playing through the chords rather than just barreling one pentatonic scale through the whole thing. So let's try them here where I'm going to emphasize this octave. Again, you have the guide tones here on G7, on C7. Here we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to emphasize those guide tones on the second and third strings, and it's going to sound like this. So even though that was very basic, you could hear that I'm playing through the chords. And what I'm starting to do is kind of chain information to where I'm leading into the next chord by a half step, which is really effective. So now what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to play it on all strings. I'm still going to emphasize the middle strings for the most part. But what I want to do is start playing chromatics into the note I want to land on. So for example, if I'm on G7, I'm going to do this. I'm going to play the note G, and I'm going to land on the third of C7. Things like that leading into it that are going to create more movement within the chords. That's going to sound like this. So there were two examples where I used chromatic notes to land on the next chord, which is really effective. It sounds like you're playing through the chord progression. You could start making it jazzier. Some would say that's already jazzy sounding, but it's a way to still keep that blues element in there and, you know, retain that type of sound. So what you want to do with this is play this in all keys, start isolating these small sections of the blues and really try to figure out how to play through them. So the good news with these is they are basically the same in every key because the note relationships remain the same no matter what key you play them in. So some gear I'm using today, I just purchased this Schecter Solo 2 Special. I bought it used for about $500, and I'm a sucker for guitars with, you know, basically satin finishes and mahogany and P90 pickups. That's a combination that works really well for me. This guitar plays great right out of the chute, and I'm enjoying it for right now until I buy the next one. As far as my amp, I'm using my 71 Fender Princeton amp that I use heavily on this channel. And that amp works well all the time. So sometimes we get some questions about what gear is being used, so I'm trying to feature that a little more on the videos. Side note, I'm using a Boss G7 with the XTS mod that emphasizes the mid-range of the pedal. I have it up just a little bit, but adds a little sweetener in the mid-range. So I'm messing around with that right now. And that is basically it. So if you are a current subscriber, thanks for returning to the channel. We appreciate it. If you are not subscribed, please consider doing so. It really helps the channel grow. If you find this lesson to be useful, please like and comment below and let us know what your experience using guide tones in your soloing has brought you. Anyway, that's all I have for today. I will see you in the next video, and thanks for watching GenX Guitar.